I think we begin not now, today, but in a long series of fateful decisions leading up to June 30th. I think it's important to realize that by the time we get to June 30th, Egypt has very few options to have a safe exit, to have an orderly resolution. And it is that series of mistakes and intransigence and hubris that I think mostly lies at the feet of Mohamed Morsi that has brought us to this point. I think after June 30th, Morsi was an irreparably damaged leader. Not only had he seen unprecedented public protest, a new uprising against his rule that, in fact, in numbers surpassed that brought down Mubarak, but he'd lost control of the levers of authority of the state. And his continuance as president, I think, was untenable. I think at that point, the honorable step would have been to resign. I think that was the one way out, to call early elections. That was the way out for Egypt in terms of preserving the country and its social fabric and perhaps avoiding bloodshed. I think we've seen since that time a series of very suboptimal outcomes and ones that perhaps might usher in further instability. But I think we cannot isolate those decisions from everything that preceded it in the year under his tenure.
Shadi Hamid, your response.
Look, I mean, no one should act surprised by the violence that we saw earlier today. At least 43 unarmed protesters have been massacred, mostly from the Brotherhood and other supporters of Morsi. Now, this kind of thing is intrinsic to a coup. You can't support a coup and then afterwards say that you don't want the results of the coup. What coups do is they provoke a crisis of legitimacy. You have one part of the country that considers the new president to be legitimate, Adli Mansour, and you have the other part of the country that maintains that President Morsi continues to be the legitimate president and commander of the armed chiefs. Because there is no political process, there are no elections, the constitution has been suspended, there is no organized political process through which to resolve that fundamental crisis of legitimacy. So inevitably, there's going to be violence. And those of us who were against the coup were saying this day in and day out the last week and longer, that a coup would be dangerous. Historically, coups can lead to either civil war, civil conflict, military dictatorship. We're supposed to learn from the lessons of the past, but watching this, we're making the same mistakes. And we saw some similar events in Algeria in 1992, where the military there engineered a military coup to annul elections that brought Islamists to power.
Michael Hayden.
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of points that are very important. The violence that we saw today isn't just intrinsic to a coup. It's intrinsic to how Egypt's security forces have operated continuously under Mubarak, under the previous period of interim military rule, and crucially, under Mohamed Morsi. This isn't new, and it is one of his fateful decisions to essentially try to co-opt the police force and to use that mode of repression in the face of growing instability and protest against him. So this violence, yes, it is nothing new, but it is also, we saw in Port Said in January 2013, very recently, a police rampage that killed over 50 citizens. Following that violence, we saw Mohamed Morsi praising the police force. So, yes, this is nothing new, but this is intrinsic to the Egyptian state, not necessarily something out of the blue. I think it's important when we think about Algeria to also think about all the ways in which this is different. These Islamists governed. The Muslim Brotherhood was in power. I think what we also saw was widespread popular protest and mass mobilization against Morsi that includes conservatives and Muslims. And even in his time of need, his Islamist support, some of it began to fray and peel away in the form of the Noor Party. So it's a very different fact pattern. And I don't think we should expect an Algeria scenario because I think these are very different situations.
Can you respond to that, Shadi Hamid? Also, Al Jazeera reporting the military's vast economic interest in Egypt, one of those secrets which is not really a secret. Analysts have predicted the Egyptian military controls anything from 15% to 40% of the economy. Shadi Hamid.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple things here. First of all, in Algeria, I mean, what happened was a military coup. Of course, there are major differences, but I think we can also try to learn from what happened in Algeria so that the international community and Egyptians themselves can start to reduce the polarization that is going on. I mean, Michael made some valid points about Morsi's tenure being a disaster. It was, but that doesn't justify a military coup against the first democratically elected government. And no one can pretend that that was going to go smoothly. And I should also note that there is something unprecedented about this. Michael said that there's nothing new about the military killing people. That's true, but what is new that this is the first massacre against the Muslim Brotherhood since the 1950s, since 1954 under Gamal Abdel Nasser. So this never happened under Mubarak, not under Sadat. In that sense, this is going to have a powerful symbolic effect, and it's going to be very difficult to turn back from this. How do you convince the Brotherhood to reintegrate into the political process and participate in upcoming elections when their blood is being spilled? I had some hope for that yesterday, but after the events of this morning, it's going to be very, very difficult.
Well, I share some of those concerns. I mean, this is an appalling loss of life. The brutality of the Egyptian security forces, police and army included, is terribly worrisome for the future stability of the country. I think one thing we've learned about Egypt post-Mubarak is that repressive stability is a failure. It cannot work henceforth. It produces its own instability. So, I mean, I don't approach this scenario blithely. I've thought for quite some time that Egypt has been on the cusp of civil strife. We've seen the signs of a society breaking down. And I'm not going to lay that all on the foot of June 30th and the uprising. I think that's been the case for months now. We saw public lynching of Shia citizens in the streets following incitement by clerics. This is a society in need of reconciliation and a halt to the dehumanization that is going on. But I think that began long before June 30th.